I want to welcome all of you to what I can assure you is going to be an extremely insightful and delightful book reading because, this author needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. She is widely considered to be the mother of Indian blogging and generally acknowledged as India's first influencer. She pioneered the billion-dollar influencer and blogging industry in India when digital media was still in its infancy. She went on to create a digital powerhouse, a media powerhouse, popularly known as MissMalini.com, today's go-to digital destination for all things Bollywood, fashion, lifestyle, and everything else you can think of for entertainment. She is probably the most inspirational person you will ever meet, and now she is a two-time author, and her new book, Under the Influence, is a veritable guide on how to survive and thrive online. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the one and only Malini Agarwal, or Miss Malini. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rij Eappen. I'm, first and foremost, Nyanu oru Malayaliyana. But also, I have known Malini for over 20 years, way before the Miss was added to her name. I've known her from her radio jockey days and seen her build an empire from her living room couch. And she went on to become one of the most powerful women in media in India. I've long admired her passion, her creativity, and her understanding of the social and digital ecosystem. And she was single-handedly responsible for pushing me to get started on my own journey as an influencer, which I completely credit to her. But what I personally also admire about Malini is her genuine interest in people, her kindness, her compassion, and this innate need to help others. And I'm proud to call her my closest friend. Hello, Malini.
What a lovely intro. Thank you, Rich.
So, before we get into the book, why did you write this book? And, why were you the right person to write this book?
Well, I think I'm just going to have to read the very first page of this book for that.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for like 15 years. And I think one of the things I want to tell you about this book is it's not a book that tells you how to become a successful social media influencer. It's a book that tells you all the things that I did wrong. And hopefully that will help you become a good influencer, or at the very least, a good influence in your own life. So hi everybody, I'm Malini Agarwal, also known as Miss Malini. I guess I should explain why I'm writing this book at all. Aside from the fact that I signed a 2-book deal with HarperCollins and they already paid me. Nobody ever taught me how to use social media, and I think that was a mistake. Why, you may ask? Well, because believe it or not, I have been somebody's troll or accidental troll too. Spoiler alert, read on to find out who. And if it can happen to me, it can surely happen to you. So I'm going to try and teach you the things I wish someone had taught me before I signed up for my virtual reality. Consider this your unofficial textbook, a dummy's guide to being good online, if you like. One that should, could, or might just make it into your syllabus one day and perhaps somehow help the learning curve for millennial to come. I'm really hoping that this book will help millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, or whatever we're calling the TikTok generation. Hopefully not the TikTok generation, I think it's Gen Beta now. Understand the mistakes I've made and the dopamine I've chased, because you might have chased it too.
Yeah, I'm sure that most of us here that are on social media can vouch for the fact that we all chase that dopamine. We all look for the likes, we all look for the shares and the views. But that unfortunately is the way it has become now. So, let's go back to the beginning of your book. You talk a lot about being good online. And you talked about the generational differences between, people back then and now, and what led to those, to a lot of those differences and what went wrong. What went wrong? Maybe you can read the last line on page 14 till the end of page 15 to tell us.
So I think one of the biggest things that went wrong is that nobody taught us how to use social media and what it was for. And I've kind of unpacked it in this book. So, while we were racing into this digital age, we as a species completely forgot to add a very important part to our curriculum, which is how to behave online. We just never stopped to update the map when it came to crucial things like emotional, intellectual, and social preparedness. So when you have unfettered access to the entire world at your fingertips, across borders, race, religion, and culture, accountability, even with anonymity, that means you have no conscience, there's no self-check. Resisting the urge to virtually vomit every thought that crosses your mind, and some semblance of virtual law and order or civic sense. Of course, some people are beyond redemption in this regard. Many trolls, in fact, are trolls in life. I'm sure you've heard of things like the Blue Whale Challenge, an online game that involved manipulating young children into hurting themselves and even led to the death by suicide of many, could only be the work of a clinical sadist. But since we've got literally everyone with an internet connection and given them free entry into our minds with little governance, and no digital reimagining of social ethics, perhaps even a troll police that issues a kind of certificate of sanity or conducts a quick background check that gives you a virtual visa, with repeat offenders being denied access to digital society. I know we have cyber laws and stuff, but I have yet to test their effectiveness, and I tried to do that a little bit in this book. But since all of this appears to still be a major work in progress with so many layers, I really thought about how do you even begin to teach someone how to be good online. And I think this is something that you talk about a lot, Rij. We always talk about social media as this toxic place where people are so mean, and when something happens online, we tell that person, what do you expect? It's the internet. But like Rij actually always says, he goes, the internet is not some alien nation that showed up, that we're suddenly having to deal with. We are the internet. So everything that we put out there is something that one other human has sort of created and put out there. So I think that's the real important change that has to be made, is what are we putting out for people to consume?
Yeah, and I think the problem with that is that people have different reasons for being on social media, right? And sometimes they don't really like what they're seeing on internet, on social media, and so they react. And maybe, we should learn not to react with the different things that you see online. And that, unfortunately, is a problem. But a lot of the content that is being put out there, unfortunately, is purely for numbers, right? Social media has completely become a numbers game, right? Everyone's looking for validation from strangers on the last piece of content that you put out there. What is your take on that whole psychology of chasing numbers? Maybe you can read from page 55 and 56.
So the numbers game that social media has gotten us addicted to is a really unhealthy one, and I'm sure you're aware of that. I see a lot of people nodding in the audience. And it's a gravely unnatural one too. Now imagine if every conversation you ever had was rated by the person you're talking to. Like if you're talking to someone, you would expect to receive a double pat on the back at the end of the conversation. And if you didn't get it, you'd be deeply mortified about your performance and what other people think about you. That would be so weird, right? But in our virtual reality, the first thing our eyes scan when we post a picture is whose name pops up under the poster story, who liked it and how many times it was liked. That has become our validation, our social currency. So now we're trying to become someone who we think other people will like, as opposed to who we really are. Because somehow we think we're not good enough. Or at least not as good enough as the guy who has 1 million followers and 500,000 likes. We probably don't even stop to consider what we like about him, just that we know we don't like being liked less. Imagine if you constantly did that in your real life circles, like a never-ending popularity contest. That would definitely result in the largest and longest season of Big Boss ever. Sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Every medium has its own bias, its own environment, its own reality. And we occasionally understand that when a medium and a message get together, it can be a very powerful one. So I'll tell you a really brutal truth about me, one that I've never really shared before, so gulp. I struggle with Instagram, even though I've been on it for so many years. I struggle with my Insta integrity. I know that often when I post something emotional or soul-bearing, it'll perform better. And sometimes I wonder if I'm posting it for the dopamine or because I really want to share it. Other times, I know that some people will ignore the caption and focus on the picture, so I'll pair a sexy picture or what is known as a thirst trap with an important message. So they balance out and the post gets enough engagement and enough people read my message. But often, it's not even a case of what do people think about me, but rather what do people think other people think about me? And that's the bigger stress. Do you feel that? It's this bias of the medium, or is it my own reality? And is it deception or more forgivably seduction? I'm still trying to find answers to that question. But I think while I was writing this book, Rij, what really started to strike me was that I was starting to change who I am as a person based on the validation, the social validation I was getting. And, I even got a t-shirt made that says, it's not you, it's the algorithm. Because very often you'll put out something that you feel so strongly about, that you spend so much time on, but the algorithm doesn't pick it up unless enough people immediately engage with it or comment or share it with someone. So now you have all of these viral hacks that try to post things that someone would share because it makes them sound more intelligent. But I found that some of the work that I'm the proudest of didn't get the kind of engagement that I would have loved for it to do. And some of the stupidest stuff, where it's like that 1 second video that everyone's making, got 1 million views. Like, I'll give you an example. I just did a video with Khushi Kapoor and Junaid for their film. And we did this LOVE song from Love Yapa. And that got 1 million views. And last week I wrote a really important piece about something I feel strongly about, and it just got 1,000. So now here's the struggle, is if you want to be successful on social media, what is your measure of that success? What I realized is when I started out my career, I used to create the content or write the blog, and my measure of success was how proud am I of the piece of work that I've put up? How proud am I of this blog or this post that I've written? Not how happy am I with the amount of likes it got. So I think that's kind of been the shift for me.
Yeah, but that's a great way to look at it, right? But I think for your average person out there on social media, I don't think they look at it that way. I think it's also changing for them on a regular basis, right? How do you think social media is changing us, or the way that we, kind of see ourselves in relation to others?
I actually have a good story on that. Will you tell me
Page 50?
So this is actually something so when I was doing this book, I did a lot of research, and that's why I'm reading you pieces of it, which I don't remember always off the top of my head. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I read pretty much everything there was online, just so I wouldn't be writing this book from a place of, zero research. And I was recently at the Chennai Lit Fest talking on a panel about research versus experts. And the research is also important. And the crazy thing is there isn't that much research about what the internet has done to us either. But here's something I came across that I thought was super interesting. So I came across a fascinating podcast, which I encourage everyone to listen to. It's called The Secret History of the Future. And it's hosted by the economists Tom Standage and Seth Stevenson of a magazine called Slate. It blew my mind in so many different ways, so I highly recommend you listen to it. The premise of the podcast is that if you delve far back enough into the past, you'll eventually unlock a few secrets about the future. Because as we all know, history tends to repeat itself. And the host said, discovering how people reacted to past innovations can also teach us about our future selves. Interesting. So here's what really piqued my curiosity. In the podcast, the host shares the story of an anthropologist called Ted Carpenter, who in 1969 decided to conduct an experiment with the people of Papua New Guinea. The people there had never seen themselves in a picture before, some not even in a mirror. So Carpenter's goal was to see what impact a mirror or image of oneself had on the people, and the results were chilling. So these people went pretty much from zero to selfie in just a few seconds. And it kind of blew their minds. They started to almost immediately help the camera tell lies. Of course, it took them a minute to understand what was going on. So Mr. Carpenter had to point to their nose or their hair, and then the corresponding part for the picture for it to sink in. And once they understood that they could see their soul or their image and their identity outside of themselves, they were suddenly so startled. So read that sentence again and tell me if that didn't give you goosebumps. Instagram much? Mr. Carpenter called this phenomenon instant alienation, which made the self more real, more dramatic, and I suppose more alone. Eventually, they started wearing these photos of themselves on their foreheads, almost like a second face. And their friends would greet them by first looking at the photo and presumably making some kind of judgment, and the photo becomes the more important manifestation. This brought up an interesting and somewhat eerie point. In today's digital age, we see each other on social media far more than we do in real life. Think about that. Think about all the people you know, maybe aside from your immediate family or friends or colleagues who you see every day. And now think about how often you've seen your friends in person and compare to how many times you see them on social media in any given week. What impact does that have on you? Which version of them do you know better? And which version do you associate more with? Pictures always have a way of carving a permanent memory in our minds, even if it's a falsehood. And that's the entire basis of the memory trick called the mind palace. But here's where I thought it was so fascinating to me is people often struggle with FOMO. I'm pretty much made of FOMO, as you know. And FOMO is this fear of missing out. And then when you see your friends or a celebrity on social media living this impossibly perfect life in these beautiful pictures, doing something fun and exciting every day, you're like, my life must suck. But you don't see anyone carve out all the sad or negative or boring times in their life. I just heard a comedian talking about something called liming. Do you know what liming is? Liming is saying, I'm going to have my friends come over and we're going to lime, which means we're going to come over and do nothing. So we might talk, we might not talk, we'll sit around and we'll have no plan to go watch a movie or do an activity or go to a party or get dressed up. We're going to hang out and do nothing. And I find more and more that's the moment where I have the most peace of mind and joy is when I'm actually not trying to do anything that's supposed to feel a certain way or look a certain way or make me feel a certain way. Because an interesting thing happens to people who do what I do for a living. We have to live every experience twice. One when I'm doing it, and one when I'm posting it. And one when I'm doing it, I'm the judge of how much I enjoyed it, what it felt like. And the second one is the world deciding how good a job I did at it or whether it was worth going to at all. So technically, I get to enjoy unfettered access to my joy in the first version, but unfortunately, my first version is always like this. So my camera eats first before I eat. My camera watches the sunset first before I watch the sunset. Or my camera enjoys the show before I enjoy the show, whether it's Coldplay or a Bollywood experience. And I was just telling my friends this earlier today, is that I found a weird thing starting to happen to me personally. And I'm sure a lot of these mental health conditions are going to come to light over the years and there'll be research about it, is that I no longer enjoy an experience when I'm having it because I'm so busy worrying about how perfectly I'm documenting it. But I really enjoy my version of it when I watch it on social media after I've edited the reel and I've put it up with the caption and the pictures and I watch it 2 or 3 times, and that's when I enjoyed the Coldplay concert. That's when I enjoyed my experience of anything. And I wonder if that's okay. I'm still processing that. But I'm like, okay, at least I enjoyed it one of the 2 times.
Yeah, but I think that's the same for all of us, right? If you are someone who, even if you're not an influencer, if you just choose to post on social media on a regular basis, you're stuck with this thought that I need to capture this, whether I post it or not, but I need to capture this first. And that, unfortunately, takes some of that joy away.
I also think it's so interesting, like now you see, like every concert, every show, it used to be people would be holding up a flashlight or a lighter or whatever. Right now, you just see a sea of cameras and there's 10,000 people recording from every angle the same thing, right? And I wonder what is the compulsion. One is that show everyone ki main bhi gaya tha, I was there. And the other one is just this, like I'm addicted to my phone. I have the weirdest nightmares. I dream or have a nightmare sometimes that I lost access to my Instagram or it got deleted. This is a weird nightmare to have, but it's a true thing. But I wonder why we've become in this, like, it's that kind of thing, right? If a tree fell in the forest and you didn't see it, did it fall? So if I didn't document an experience, now I feel, because I'm 47, so I've lived the life offline, where I moved to Bombay with an alphanumeric pager. I didn't have a phone. I used to make my plans on a landline. And when I went and did something really amazing, I would come back and tell my friends. and tell them the experience, and I would recount it. And I used to be a radio jockey, and I loved the theater of the mind because, and I'm sure as readers here, you'll know why the book is always better than the movie is because your version, the director of the film in your head is always better and your more favorite one than anybody else is imagining. So I kind of really struggle with the idea that we've now entered or put ourselves into this world where I'm sometimes, and a funny thing happens where people will say, okay, please come to this event, but no cameras allowed. And sometimes I'll be like, should I go then? Yeah. You know? Yeah. Is it worth it for me just to have the experience if I'm not going to document it?
Yeah, but I think for you it's different because you have to, well, most of the time you get paid to actually go and document it. But for a lot of people, I think the idea of just not documenting it just in case you want to talk about it or show it to someone, I think that's getting staggeringly more rampant. I think
and it's interesting, right? Now it's like I have to show you the video. I can't just tell you what it was like.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what? Going back to how people are starting to behave online. Sometimes being mean on the internet is not necessarily premeditated, right? Yeah. Sometimes you troll someone, without even realizing you're actually doing it. But the question is, what do you do after you've had that realization, right? And that's the part that defines you. What I love about this book, Under the Influence that Malini wrote, is that she's been extremely honest about how she's been. All the mistakes that she's made along, the 15 years that she's built the industry, and all the times that you've been an accidental troll. I think you've got some pretty funny stories there. Do you want to tell us about your
And I apologize
stories?
in advance because this one might feel very personal.
Yeah, especially because there's one with Rajnikant in it. So
I'll start by saying this. We all, in this world now, where in India we have 1.5 million influencers and everyone wants to be an influencer, I think the fair warning is being under the influence is not always a good thing. Sometimes when you're intoxicated or drunk, people say, oh, he's or she's under the influence. Or when you're sick, you have influenza. So I've always thought of myself as a good person, but I realized that I was also somebody's accidental troll. And this first story, as Rich said, is to do with Rajnikant. So back in 2008, I got some pictures of Rajnikant without his hair and makeup. Now, I assume since people love to see candid pictures of celebrities in Hollywood, I didn't really think about it, and I posted it. The next day, I woke up to a flurry of angry messages from his fans. And they weren't even trolling me. They were genuinely upset and angry about what I'd done to their idol. And that's when it hit me. We talk about fat shaming, complexion shaming, but what had I done? I had shamed him too. And that morning I asked myself this: if there were no likes or no public display of the number of my followers, would I still use social media the same way? And what does that say about me? So I deleted the post and I wrote an apology, but here's the thing. The more I thought about it, the more it made me wonder what gave rise to that kind of behavior. Is it just because we opened ourselves up to too many people too fast? Or is it something about the medium and the anonymity it affords that tips people over to the dark side? I once had a conversation about human behavior, karma, and how we interact in the real world, and it struck me that over the centuries, and perhaps right from the very beginning of time, it's been perfectly normal behavior to walk into a room full of other humans and show no signs of greeting them or acknowledging them and just exit. And then I started to wonder if the same is true for animals. Like, do cows stand around in a field in little cliques of their own? Because, cows have best friends. And do they just passive-aggressively coexist with zero Fs to give about each other? This particular epiphany of mine happened while talking to a Frenchman who was in India for the first time, representing the global team from Moët and Chandon. As he smiled politely and nodded, it occurred to me that I had somehow brought up cows and reincarnation in a conversation while professing that I was Hindu and not a very religious one. So well played, Malini. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is because it made me think about how differently we behave online than we do offline. In real life, there are many unspoken boundaries and limits to the liberties you take with other people's space. Boundaries that don't quite seem to have made the map online. For example, I would never go up to a total stranger and poke them in the ribs. Remember Facebook 2007 where you could just poke a stranger? Just like you wouldn't shove an eggplant or the organ that it represents in someone's face to say hello, or at least that's the hope. So There is another story to follow. I'll tell that one.
Yeah.
So you think, all of us think of ourselves as good people. So does our social media reflect that? Have all the comments you've made on social media, or have you been an accidental troll sometimes too? The thing is, right now, there's no accountability for our online behavior. But what if there was? What if what you did on social media indicated that? I'm sorry, I lost my... Oh, sorry, okay. What if what you did on social media had a significant real-life consequence? In fact, in some countries, it's already happening. China has started a social credit system. The exact methodology is a secret, but things like bad driving, buying too many video games, posting fake news online, posting too much on social media, or surfing porn are punished by banning offenders from buying business class train tickets or flying. They're also rewarding people for having a good score with more matches on dating sites. Let's be honest, if your social media footprint were investigated like they do in China, ask yourself, would you be able to fly? Really think about this. If you swapped your virtual reality with reality, what kind of person would you be? Would you behave the same way? Would you change? In order to demonstrate this, let's imagine social media as the virtual version of an actual party. Would you go around taking Polaroid pictures of yourself and handing them to everyone? Would you double tap people in their face and walk away? If someone spilled their whole life story to you, would you just do a thumbs up and, get on your way? Now, I hope the answer to all of the above is no. So then why do we treat the internet like a dumping ground for all our negative emotions? And never for a second think about the fact that everything we post is a reflection of ourselves, and it's going to be there forever.
You want to tell them about the Ranveer Singh story? Yeah.
So one more story on this. So do I regret anything I've said online? As you know, the answer, dear Rajnikant, is a resounding yes. And I'm willing to admit you weren't the first or last victim of my oblivion. I just didn't realize I was being part of the problem. Because it was the internet, and the internet has no rules. So I started as a Bollywood blogger. So considering people's feelings was never part of my job description. I thought, just following in the footsteps of our cigarette weed-wielding Madam M from Stardust. Remember, she had that black Cleopatra cat. And she didn't seem at all apologetic or bothered by it. You know why? Because anonymity is your ticket out of accountability, and that is the problem with the internet. While I was this cute little Miss M anime, and many people didn't even realize that I was a real human being, it was all fun and games. But you really start hitting the feels when both parties realize the other one is human, because then you start to rightfully expect a little humanity. So that's when the penny dropped, I guess. And I was sure, for one, I would know where to draw the line. My moral compass was now fully tuned, and I would think first and blog later. So now I'm all set, right? Wrong. I learned another very important lesson some years later when I first met Ranveer Singh in 2011. This was at the Blenders Pride Fashion Tour, and I was super thrilled to see him for the first time, and I went bounding up to him to say hello, and he said, "Miss Malini, I'm really mad at you." And I was shocked, and I said, "Why?" And he drew my attention to a blog that a member of my team had written, mocking his rap on India's Most Desirable. I realized a highly ironic act, considering the legendary success of Gully Boy a decade later. And my first reaction was a really defensive, but I didn't write it, it was someone from my team. But then I had to take accountability for it. So if it's gone up on my blog, I'm responsible. So I apologized, and he was super gracious about it, although I could tell I had really hurt his feelings. And that was certainly never my intention. So I shared a simple rule with my whole team. When in doubt of whether to carry a piece of juicy gossip or write an opinion about someone, celebrity or otherwise, ask yourself this: would you feel comfortable saying it to their face? That is, do you have the balls for the eyeballs? And if the answer is no, then you cannot write it at all. And that is the rule we stood by for the last decade and a half. And there is a picture of me and Ranveer from back then. But that's the rule we follow, that if you can't say it to their face, then you can't write it at all. And this shouldn't just apply to influencers or people who write about celebrities. I think if you apply that in your own life, you'll find a very different version of yourself, a much nicer version and a more authentic version of yourself online.
Well, and that was a great thing. And I saw when this happened, when Malini told her entire team that you can never, again, write something that you can't tell the person to his face. And I think that's a great way for all of us to be online. Because if more of us did that, there'd be less trolling, there'll be less mean comments, and people judging you for things that are, that have nothing to do with them. I think life would be a lot better. But you've faced a lot of trolls as well, right? I think everyone, I think you've faced quite a few people that have actually trolled you that have affected you more than anything else. Do you want to tell us about that? Maybe read page 66.
So Ronan Keating may have sung "It's Only Words and Words Are All I Have to Take Your Heart Away" about love, but much the same is true about trolling. And somehow unkind words have a tendency to stick in our memory because we're secretly afraid they're true. Or worse, we're secretly afraid others will think they're true. So I'll give you a little example of my own. Many years ago, someone commented on a selfie I had posted saying, "Malini, before you post a selfie, you should get a nose job." I don't remember who posted that. It was obviously no one I personally knew or cared about. But since that day, and it's probably been like now almost 15 years, I religiously compare my nose to everyone else's in a close-up photo. It just happens subconsciously. I don't like selfies. True story. It's juvenile, a random comment I couldn't share. I shouldn't care about, vagera, vagera. I'm not proud of it, but it happens. And that comment just hit a forever nerve. But what if all trolls aren't born trolls? What if they're ordinary people like you and me? So there was a whole study that they did actually with 667 people, and they realized that if you were given the same article to read, and if the person's mood was slightly off and it was after dark, they had a 67 higher percent chance of leaving a negative comment than a positive one. So our environment, what has happened to us that day, all of that has a huge impact. In addition, if the conversation about a topic was initiated by an angry comment, it was 2 times as likely to be trolled in return. Interestingly, mood and discussion context were together a much stronger indicator of trolling than identifying a specific individual. In other words, trolling is caused more by the person's environment than any inherent trait. I'll tell you another story, and this is, you can laugh because I believe that comedy is just tragedy plus time. So this is another anecdote of myself, and you're allowed to laugh because enough time has passed. For the longest time, I thought LOL was short for lots of love. Now, this is a harmless enough mistake, right? But imagine responding to a tragic text message about a dead relative, thinking I've said, "I'm sorry for your loss, lots of love," with prayer hand emojis, which, by the way, might have been meant to be a high five by the emoji makers. When, in fact, I seem to have said, "I'm sorry for your loss, laughs out loud, high five." Still deeply mortified by this one.
That's hilarious. That's actually my favorite part of the book. But why do you think we've become what we've become?
I don't think we knew what we were getting into.
Yeah.
I think that, we're the last generation that knows life without social media. Generation Beta, which is Gen B, which is now anyone born in this new generation, is going to be living in a very immersed technological society. And I think even for me, the big penny dropped during COVID because we spent so much more time online. If you also notice, even if you're not in a social media world, you ended up doing all of your work calls on Zoom with cameras on. I don't think I've ever spent so much time looking at myself in a work day than I did during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's true.
Mostly at my own nose, thanks to that one troll, So you just end up scrutinizing yourself, and this whole thing about alienation, self-alienation, because you're no longer in your body, you're now this visual outside, has a deep impact. And I think what's happened over the years is that we joined the internet, like my mom, is 85 now, so still kind of doesn't know what I do for a living. I remember a funny story when people used to ask her what beti kya karti hai. She used to say, "Malini is an internet blocker." That all the regular people get so much spam, and celebrities ko itna zyada spam milta hoga, so she blocks their spam. This is generally what she thought I did, that I somehow was in everybody's Priyanka Chopra's email blocking her. But it's so funny because they thought that, okay, every day, you must be playing some games on your phone, because traditionally technology was associated with entertainment or gaming. Yeah. So I think the mistake we made is we didn't think of it as real life. Yeah. We didn't think of virtual reality as reality at all. So we didn't apply any rules. Even now, when we say, when I see so many friends who have kids, you still teach them, say thank you, please, sorry, cover your nose when you sneeze, cover your mouth when you cough, careful when you go out in the street, don't talk to strangers. Has anyone told you, or have you ever told anyone when they got online, don't talk to strangers? I don't think so.
And that's a problem.
And that's a problem,
because
yeah.
even in our schools today,
Nobody's doing that,
nobody
yeah.
talks about it. Nobody talks about, what etiquette on social media should be or on the internet should be.
You know, there's a great documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
And it talks about the fact that human beings were never meant to be, or were not emotionally or mentally prepared to be judged and given feedback by so many people
Yeah.
at given time.
Yeah.
Or so many people they don't know. As a child growing up, especially your formative years, which is why right now you can join social media at 13, but there are many countries that are now instating a law that until you are 16, you can't get online. For these reasons. Why is the same reason that you want to learn how to drive a car, you need to take driving lessons, right? You want to get any job, even in biology class when you were, with that scalpel, dissecting that frog, someone was telling you how to do it, right?
Yeah.
If I just threw you car keys and said drive, you'll definitely crash. So no one taught us anything. Even using a vacuum cleaner or a washing machine comes with a 30-page manual. Nobody gave us even a sheet of paper to say, here, read this before you go online. And what happened is that the people that you're supposed to get feedback from, your friends, family, circle of love or trust, will generally give you constructive criticism. When you go online, you will get all kinds of criticism and a lot of destructive criticism. And at that age, and even, I'm not even saying as a kid, even at my age, destructive criticism has its impact. Because we are all human beings and bad news or negative criticism always cuts deeper than a compliment feels.
Yeah. But I think the problem with that was that, the internet and social media itself, specifically, is still growing.
Yeah.
No one knows. There's no manual for, for being on social media or for creating social media. In fact, the Instagram algorithm changes more often, than an influencer changes clothes, right? Because they're still trying to figure out what is the best way to make the people on Instagram reach more people, or they can drive more revenue to themselves from it. So,
See, the
so
goal
this is going to be an
for-
ever-changing goalpost.
The goal for social media, and I was just saying, I just watched this documentary on Avicii, and he had a very tragic end, and how he became the biggest EDM DJ in the world, and how the big dichotomy is that everybody tells you what they think is their measure or what should bring you happiness when you're successful. So he became this huge EDM DJ, so much money, known around the world, collaborating with the biggest artists. And he struggled with the idea that people said, you have everything that people dream of. Why isn't this making you happy? And then he was even more unhappy that why am I not happy with having all these things? When he realized what really brought him true happiness was the freedom to create music and art without an algorithm telling him whether or not it was good enough. And that's what's happened. And the whole role of social media platforms, even though it's given me my life, took its pound of flesh, that because their goal is to keep as many people online for as long as possible. Yeah. So how do they do that? This dopamine thing is real, right? What happens, and I'm going to make you all do something right now, is that you get dopamine when you get that little beep or buzz on your phone. There's a chemical reaction. And dopamine, and it releases the same sort of chemicals, and I'll tell you about the helper's high in that in a bit. It releases a chemical that gives you that euphoria. But the struggle with this is, when you put that dopamine and the power of getting that dopamine in someone else's hands, you're actually giving someone the power over you, like a drug dealer, like giving your dealer the power over someone who does drugs. And there's a very clear reason that people on the internet are not called consumers, they're called users, just like drug users are called users, because it very much is a drug.
Yeah. So how do we fix it? That's the big question.
I've tried to find a way to fix it.
I mean, for all the people out there, you probably, would have some of the answers, or at least, a blueprint on how we should probably live our life on that. I think one of those things could be 165. I think 165 is a... Yeah.
So if you know me at all, you know how deeply I value kindness and empathy. And there's a quote by Bob Carey that I love that said, "Unexpected kindness is the most powerful, least costly, and most underrated agent of human change." So chances are high that if we've ever met, if you've come across my social media, you've heard me speak passionately and probably at length about the importance of kindness. And I urge you now to pause for a moment and answer this question. If I told you that the most valuable currency in the world is positivity, and it comes in denominations of kindness and empathy, ask yourself, how much are you worth? The best part is there's no barrier to entry. You can be a positivity trillionaire if you simply choose to do it. I jokingly refer to myself as Optimist Prime, a fun reimagining of Optimus Prime from the movie series Transformers, a wonderful moniker by my dear friend Sid Shah, who he gave me that years ago, and I hold on to it dearly because he has it in droves. I personally feel positive people tend to be kind as well. Maybe because positive people have a happier outlook on life, but first we should address what kind of happiness we're talking about. Hedonic happiness is all about yourself. Increase your pleasure, avoid pain. While eudaimonic happiness includes others. Many great researchers, and I will butcher their names so I'm not going to say them now, describe kindness as a combination of three things: the motivation to be kind to others, recognition of kindness in others, and engaging in kind behavior every day. So what was the net finding? Happy people become more kind and grateful through the counting kindness intervention. And this is a real thing. The counting kindness intervention asks people to become more aware of their own kind behavior towards other people every day for 1 week. And you simply keep track of it. And I have a little chart in this book that helps you do that. You simply must track all the acts of kindness that you perform through the week and report the daily number. And you know you're going to love this one. You can just, collect happiness by helping one person every day. And what you'll realize is a really interesting thing. And I think that I'm sure we've all experienced this. When you do something nice for someone else, how do you feel? Do you feel good or do you feel bad? Or nothing at all? You always feel good. So now imagine how you are exponentially growing that impact of happiness. You're doubling happiness by saying, I give you some happiness and I give myself some happiness, as opposed to I'm waiting for someone to give me some dopamine so I can be happy.
Do you want to ask them to do a little exercise? Yeah.
What page is Helpers High?
169. So, yeah.
So I'll tell you about this because there's a little science behind it that I'm going to ask you to do something. So there's something that I love. It's called, in this book I read about it, The Stress of Life. This Hungarian-Canadian endocrinologist suggests doing something that really decreases our stress. It's called the Helper's High. The Helper's High is another name for the uplifting feeling that you experience after doing a deed or act of kindness. This high is rooted in our natural instincts to help fellow humans. Evolution has wired us to help each other, since helping each other is beneficial to the survival of the human race. Researchers discovered that the helper's high is more than just a feeling. Biochemical analysis revealed that the high is accompanied by positive changes in the body's immune function and lower levels of stress hormones. Another way to describe the areas of the brain that release pain-relieving endorphins is the brain's pleasure center. Endorphins are a group of opiate proteins, meaning they affect the brain like morphine, naturally. A study at the National Institute of Health showed that when people thought about giving money to a charity, the areas of the brain associated with pleasure lit up in the same way they light up when you think about food or sex. A similar study at Emory University showed that helping others lit up the pleasure reward part of your own brain. So now, here's where we go. So now that you know that a surefire way to up your own happiness quotient is by engaging in an act of kindness for someone else, doesn't that make things a whole lot better and more promising? Let me connect this to social media for you, and I'll be brutally honest about how I got here. There was a time I would wake up in the morning and obsessively check my follower count, the number of likes on a post, and how many comments I got. And then I would proceed to feel really gutted if the number didn't feel grand enough for the amount of effort or excitement I had poured in. And then I would just refresh and refresh and refresh the page, hoping for that number to go up, until I was deeply immersed in a blue cloud of absence. The problem with access to 5.3 billion people online is that when you post something and nobody notices, you feel even more lonely than when you started. So I did two things. First, I turned off my public display of likes on my post, and I turned off being able to see anyone else's either. Instagram lets you do that. So now I no longer judge a post by how many other people liked it. or double tapped it. I decide for myself if it engages me. Second, I made a rule for myself. The minute my eyes wander to the number of comments on a post and I feel that tinge of why don't more people love this, I immediately have to leave my page and visit someone else's and leave a meaningful comment. This generally elicits some kind of excitement back, and I immediately feel good about myself, and I've given someone else a shot of dopamine. The great thing about the helper's high is the more you give is the higher you get. And how much you give is always in your own hands. Isn't that so much more promising and rewarding than constantly worrying about who's coming to give you a pat on the back or a double tap on your virtual face? I think so. So here's where I'm going to pause before we do questions and ask you to do something. I want everyone to take out their phone and go to social media. Everyone is on some social media, right? Whether it's on X or Instagram or LinkedIn. I want you to open your page. And I want you to open your number. You can see the follower count that you have or any last post that you made. I want you to click on someone's profile that you don't personally know, who you can picture a face to. And I want you to go into their Instagram and I want you to leave a meaningful comment on any one of their posts. And I want you to do that now.
And not just a heart or a thumbs
And not
up.
just a heart. Leave a sentence.
Please leave a meaningful comment.
And if you want, you can tag me and say, Malini Agarwal, I'm doing it here, and I will go leave a post on their page as well and on yours. So we can create this positivity dopamine series. And I'll say this while everyone's doing it. If you notice, Rij, everybody is now smiling at their phones.
Yeah.
And that's the helper's high. The excitement and slight nervousness and little shy is also coming, that what will someone think, but nothing bad can come of this because you are now starting a chain of positivity. Because this person has no idea and no expectation for you to be doing this. So what's going to happen is they're going to get a shot of dopamine and be like, oh my God, and then they're going to say something back. And then you can continue a conversation and they will feel so happy that you did it. And you will feel happy that you so easily brought some joy in someone else's life. And here's something else I learned in the process of writing this book, is that we sit here online hoping for all this love and for our comments. And when people comment, what do? We go heart. We never ask a question back. We never go in and start a conversation because these are low stakes connections, something I write about in my book called The Dunbar Theory, that we are only cognitively able to have 150 meaningful relationships. And after that number, we max out. And so everything that you have on the internet, aside from your 150 close friends and family who genuinely leave a meaningful comment, are low stakes connections. And we are unconsciously increasing the number of low stakes connections by when someone new comes along that we don't know, we don't try to make friends with them. We just want them to love us. And that's a low stakes friendship.
Which is so true, right? We have so many people that comment on our posts, but all we do is hit like on those. And we never have a conversation that we start with them and keep going because we don't have the time. Because we want to scroll more.
That's exactly it.
Like we want to see more. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then we feel that, oh, well, we don't really have a meaningful connection with that person. Yeah. And the thing is, and that's why I turned off the numbers, is because we've turned each other as a human race into a number count. So we don't think of each other as people anymore. But every number, each one of those numbers is a human being just like us, with waking up with ourselves, looking in the mirror, having all the things that you worry about. So many times we're sitting there saying everybody thinks negatively about us, or why doesn't anyone love us? The reason is because everyone is busy thinking about themselves and worrying about how nobody loves them. Before we do questions, I'll just end with one quote from a movie I love. It says that, there are 8 billion people on the planet. So what does one life really mean? In friendship or a relationship, you're saying, I'm going to be there for the good, the bad, the mundane. Your life will not go unnoticed because I will notice it. Your life will not go unwitnessed because I will be your witness. And that's what social media is. So you have to think about what kind of witness are you being and what are you making people witness.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In fact, I was going to tell you to read the epilogue as the end, as we come to the end of this session. You've achieved a lot. We've seen, and we've been able to learn from a lot of Malini's, mistakes and pitfalls that she's witnessed and faced. With all of this recognition, how do you feel and what would you like to leave everybody with?
So I'll just read the last page of the book, okay? So occasionally people ask me what it feels like to be famous. Truth be told, I don't think of myself as famous, but I understand the question. I guess I've accomplished some stuff that has resulted in a certain level of positive infamy, for sure. And don't get me wrong, I low-key love it. But I'm not famous, and I kind of like it that way. And I'll tell you why. When fame fades, and it always does, people might point at you and going by and say, oh, look, there goes so-and-so. They used to be someone famous. But they won't say that about someone who has accomplished something. Nobody can take away your accomplishments. They'll always have to say, look, there goes so-and-so, and that's what she or he accomplished. Fame is fleeting, but nobody can take away your accomplishments. And when you're less worried about losing something, you're a lot nicer about letting other people have it too. So my advice to you, hand on heart, is spend a little more time on the internet trying to accomplish something and worry less about trying to be famous or ripping apart someone who already is, and you'll find that you live in a kinder, better world. To quote an epic quote you probably heard me say so many times, because it's the truest thing I've ever heard, you don't need to unscrew anybody else's light bulb to shine.
Thank you very much, Malini. That was now we're open for questions. If anyone has any questions for Malini, we've got about 5 minutes, so we can do 2-3 questions. Yeah.
Hi, Malini. It was really nice to hear that, and everything was straight out from your heart. I could feel that.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I just want to have some tips. I have published a book last year, the same day, Jan 26. So, do you have any tips to give that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. That means a lot. I think that the most valuable thing I learned, and I've learned this actually very recently, I've heard so many people say this, is that you obviously using social media to promote your brand or your book, and there's a lot of authors here, it's very important to understand that most people are consuming content quite passively. And I learned this from Krish Ashok in Chennai, is that most people on the internet consume content passively. So they're neither trolling you and neither are they complimenting you. But the best way to get them to engage and to promote anything is post something that you know or that you've learned or that might be in your book that they'll want to share, because that'll make them feel that if I share this, my friends will think I'm smart or cool. So if you can bite size or caption or create your content in a miniature version, whether it's using reels or carousels or whatever posts, and make shareable content, that is the best way to do it. Also, a great opportunity for so many writers here is to collaborate with each other. So if you put up content, you can use the collaboration feature. That generally helps, because know that it's always collaboration over competition. Chances are that other people in your field and niche have an audience that would appreciate what you are doing as well.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Oh, there's 2.
My question is very simple. I would like to know, why would you pay so much of attention to a comment from some random person? We're having access to over millions of reels, and it depends on how much time we spend on the internet. We come across millions of contents, and not many even remember what kind of a comment they made to the post. Yeah. So the creator who had posted, why would they have to pay any shit to it?
Yeah, I think it's such a valid point and a question. I think the psychology of it is that we're all the sum of all of our parts, right? Our generational trauma, our insecurities. And I think what happens with trolling and negative comments is that very often it touches a nerve or it hurts someone and it hits them in the feels, as they say, or in that insecurity. I also feel that people who put themselves out there, who are especially content creators in fashion, beauty, lifestyle, are always deathly fearful of their looks fading, their charm fading, and that shelf life. And I think that when they get a negative comment, and you can jump in on this too, it's scary, because when it's your livelihood and it's something that you base your career on, if you feel that everybody hates you, you worry that maybe I'm not good enough. And that's kind of, it takes a lot of strength and it takes thick skin. But honestly, it's something that I think is a much more emotional state that doesn't not necessarily come from a place of total logic, Like there's definitely some trolls that comment on things like someone posted about me and my girls on a trip in Goa, saying that you guys are aunties, you're so old, why are you posting this cringe comment? And it didn't bother me because I was like, well, I literally just replied saying, why are you a jelly donut? Because, I love how I look and I feel young and I feel good. And maybe because I'm not insecure about that, it didn't bother me. And maybe I was insecure about my nose and it bothered me, maybe.
I think this gentleman here is looking for a question, and that's probably our last question.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
I am Dr. Nisamuddin Neerath. My wife is also a doctor. We are creating health content. My concern is that when I am observing, our content is slow performing. In the sense, people are very much interested about a day in my life videos and kind of things. Obviously, I get confused and I feel very tired that we create a very much helpful content.
Yeah.
It doesn't perform, and only some jaga jagas type of contents are performing well.
Yeah.
So but that is one thing, it makes me confused. And another thing is when people leave some negative kind of comments, how to deal with that.
Yeah.
Personally, even though I'm a doctor, we feel
Of course. So great questions. I think I feel that you shouldn't compare the success of the day in the life kind of content from a creator who has a lot of following with the content you're creating, because I think it's much more of a niche audience that will appreciate it. I feel the future for content that is useful, educational content may not necessarily live best on Instagram. There are better groups on whether it's Facebook or Discourse and other platforms that I would feel might be better for it. I also feel that some of the features that work best is, on Instagram you can create a community or a broadcast group and add people. And there you slowly collect people who find these things useful. And I feel the biggest mistake we make is we spend a lot of time creating content on our own pages and waiting for someone to show up at our house. But you have to understand that you have to go to where the party is. So if you're talking about a particular illness or a condition, I would start looking for Instagram handles or people suffering from that and then go give them some valuable advice. Because then you become an expert that they want to come and follow. So don't think of your content as being something that only needs to sit on your page. Your content can very well be consumed on their pages. And that way you will use their space to encourage people to learn, and other people might ask more questions there. So I would, to use an analogy, step out of your house and go to where people are and take your content to them. And again, on the negative comments, I would say there are three kinds, right? If somebody's giving constructive criticism and you can engage and learn, great. If it's someone who clearly is just having a bad day, I'll tell you this. Most negative comments have nothing to do with you. It's that person's internal turmoil, negativity. And the other thing is that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. So if they're coming to you, they're still engaging, Instagram is still giving you the points for it. It's kind of one of those things where you say, get well soon and move along. So I am doing a book signing after, and I brought some stickers and bookmarks. So if anybody would like to pick some up, please come join us. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Rich, for doing this.
Not at all. My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.